evening, everyone. It is your girl, Marcy Thomas, and I am super happy to be back with you for another episode of the BGC Book Club with an author that I've been following for quite a while. I'm sure many of you have as well. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation that we're about to dive into. So if this is your first time here, welcome. If you've been here many times, welcome back. And it's just always a pleasure to be able to bring stories to you that are by, for, and about us. And tonight is no different. So without any further delay, I want to go ahead and introduce, yes, I'm excited for the conversation too, Rosie Lee. Welcome, welcome as always. So I am really excited to welcome this particular guest to the show. Many of you may be familiar with her work, even if you have never seen her. So this is going to be a great opportunity for all of us. And that is Trisha R. Thomas. And we're going to find out if we're related or not. But Trisha R. Thomas, who is the author of the popular Napoli series, which many of you may have read. Her debut novel, Napoli Ever After, was a finalist for the NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Literary Work, chosen for Oprah Magazine as a book that made a difference, and became a Netflix major motion picture starring our girl, Sanaa Lathan. She has written 14 books that fearlessly explore the complexity of human relationships, delving into topics such as love, family, identity, and societal issues. And this book that we're going to be talking about is no different. That is The Secret Keeper of Main Street. And I don't know if we planned this on purpose, but tomorrow this actually comes out in a paperback. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm sure Trisha is as well. So without any further delay, let's welcome Trisha R. Thomas to the stage. Welcome, Trisha.
Hi, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for being here and taking time out of your busy schedule.
Oh, I don't know about that busy, but I was excited. I was excited to get your note because I watched, so many authors get interviewed by you. And I just thought, oh gosh, I would love to be on the show, but I didn't know how to contact you or anything. So I'm just glad to be here.
Oh, Ryan, it's a pleasure to have you. And since you said that, I'm putting it up here now. Just put it out there. If you want to get to me, editor@browngirlcollective.com. Yes. Or just hit me up on IG. I do check my DMs and stuff like that. So if you want to be here, that's the way to get to me. So, but Trisha, first of all, just congratulations on all of the wonderful work that you've been doing, over the years. As I mentioned, so many people are familiar with your Napoli series. And so how many books total are in that particular series?
9.
Yeah,
9. I know they're not all titled with the Napoli title, so some people may have missed a few, but 9. And I have 10 in my computer.
Wow. Okay.
It hasn't happened yet, but yeah, so 9. That was a lot of storytelling.
That is a lot of storytelling. And I brought that up only because this book is different from that. So it's a different skill set, so to speak, because there's this series that you've built and, worked with those characters for such a long amount of time and put them in a lot of different scenarios. But in this case, with The Secret Keeper of Main Street, you're actually stepping into a different story. So what was it that made you want to write and tell this particular story?
Well, I delved into historical fiction with What Passes as Love, and that was such a great story to start out with. And but it was, in the time of enslavement, which is so hard to write, and I kind of didn't want to do that again because it was emotional. And I pitched this story about a dressmaker who had the gift of touch that would know if a bride found her true love just by, if the dressmaker touched their hand, she would know if they were marrying their soulmate or if there was someone else out there. And my editor and my agent were just like, okay, that's where we're going to go. And then they didn't ask me, anything about, what was your inspiration for this story? They just thought of it as just another story. And I didn't tell them until the book was actually, about to come out that I was a dressmaker.
Okay.
for a lot of years.
Oh, wow. Okay. I love
I
that.
I owned a bridal salon. And, even before that, I was pretty young then, but even before that, when I was in high school, I used to make all these gowns for my friends. They were either pageant people or, prom, homecoming. And so I was making their gowns in my mom's garage. And,
Wow.
but I learned how to sew from my dad. My grandmother was a dressmaker. My dad was a tailor and a dressmaker. And I mean, just the level of the way that they did the art of sewing and dressmaking, I was just captured by it when I was probably 7, 8 years old. So, I mean, I was sewing probably on a level I shouldn't have been sewing.
Okay.
Little, like child labor. But I was, really skilled. And so I tried to go away to school and major in chemistry because that's what that you take those aptitude tests and then
Right.
you're supposed to be, a mad scientist. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right. So I went to school and I majored in chemistry, and I was just not there long before I was just like coming home. I was like cutting the fabric, sewing, I was just back in it. And so, like I said, I ended up opening my own business. So I was a bride. I made these bridal gowns. It was one of those things where I thought I'm just going to do this for a few years. I ended up doing it for 14 years. And
Wow.
so those brides just left their, mark on me, basically. I mean, just the emotions and just the stories that I heard, because they basically were using me as their therapist. I mean, we go to the we go to the salon and we get our hair done. It's our therapy, it's our joy, it's our fellowship, and so I would just spend so much time alone with the brides because it's just a really intimate setting, when you're making the best decision on the best day of your life. What are you going to wear? And so I have to find out who they are, what kind of wedding. And then eventually it was just all of this stuff piled on, all this emotion. And so I had these stories, and I always wanted to tell them, but I didn't have a setting to tell them.
Okay.
So when I thought of this dressmaker who could just, touch a bride and know their life and know their secrets and their burdens and all of that stuff, I'm just like, hand up. That's the story I want to tell.
I love that. It's like, well, even though I know it's not about your life, but it's art imitating life in that way, that you were able to take a skill that you've had for a long time. You tell stories through your fashion as well, so people may not think of it that way, but you really can. I mean, we have the Met Gala every year. They're telling stories through fashion. So I love the fact that, that's a part of your background. Because I was going to ask, what made you go in this particular route. So you were talking about sewing and all of that from personal experience.
Yeah, it was probably something I just didn't expect to do and love, as long as I did. And, people have asked me that, I'm still in touch with a lot of the brides, when are you going to go back to that? And like, I can't,
Yeah.
Emotionally not able to go back to that, but just, it was a lot of work. It's definitely something that I probably wouldn't want to, really wish on anybody, because it was.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Bridezillas. So all of that show that used to come on.
Yeah, it was a lot of work.
A lot of work. But yes, just thinking about, so we know that inspiration came from your own experiences. But then what about deciding to place the story in the 1950s in Oklahoma? Because that's another choice that you would have made. What was it that in telling a historical story, what was it that made you land on Oklahoma and the 1950s?
That was probably the easiest part because
Okay.
Oklahoma is where my family is from, and um, the time frame, having it in the 1950s, that era where Bailey, who is a Black dressmaker, she's making these gowns for a very elite, oil rich group of ladies. You know, she's just really speaking dangerously when she tells them what she knows.
Right.
And so she's already, you know, I wanted the environment to be dangerous, but not, you know, unnerving. So, you know, you can't enjoy the story. But I did want the reader to feel, to know what kind of risk she was taking by even sharing these kinds of stories, you know, or sharing the information that she could see with these, you know, mostly white brides. It was risky being, you know, in that environment and speaking her mind and telling them, you know, what she knew. And so I really wanted that to be, you know, the tension about, you know, not that she could do it and that, you know, okay, if I live in California, but all of a sudden I'm making this story in California. Well, there's no tension there because everyone thinks we're all wacky in California. You know?
But even at that, in California in the 1950s, it looked different from California now. So
exactly, but still, you know, you just want to be in an area where this kind of thing is dangerous. You know, in the interaction and feeling the freedom to just, you know, tell them what she knows. And so I just, you know, that was just kind of an automatic, you know, I'm intimate with Oklahoma because that's where my family is from. And, you know, my grandmother who, you know, I said was the dressmaker, then my other grandmother, and then my great grandmother. And, you know, and they had that gift where, you know, they look at you and know, you know, that you're hiding something, you know, and they like could pretty much sum you up just from one look. And so I just, you know, I feel like that was part of just part of my own story that I just wanted to add to this other layer.
I love that. Margaret is saying, yes, the touch magic. I love how Susanna Kersley did it in her historical dual timelines and was excited to hear another author taking the same device in a different direction. Yes, because I mean, that is something to think about, you know, as you said, and if you look at this cover of the book, she's wearing these gloves, you know, she's a dressmaker, and she doesn't want to touch people because, you know, because in a way, it's being an empath as well. It's like, and she's touching and she's seeing things, she's feeling things in a way to not see and feel these certain things that, you know, you want to make sure your hands are covered. But, and then also the fact that she's doing this for wealthy white women who may not have wanted to be touched by her. And you're working with these delicate fabrics and things that you don't want to soil. So, I mean, there are a lot of reasons on the surface why she would have worn it, but we know that there's a deeper meaning behind that.
Right. Like in the story, the very first time that she was ever asked to wear the gloves was because of the racism. You know, they didn't want to be touched, you know, by the, you know, Black dressmaker. But then when she felt that she was safe from, you know, getting all of their energy and all of their truths or secrets and lies, then she's like, well, I'm going to wear gloves for every, you know, fitting. And, you know, she only took them off if someone, you know, really found out what she could do and wanted to be touched.
Right. And that's interesting. One more comment from Margaret. It is a fascinating time period, 20 years after Black Wall Street, and with all that went on with the Osage oil cover. Yes. And you do mention Black Wall Street in the book and talk about some of the things that happened historically in Oklahoma, as well as, you know, neighboring states and things like that. So was it a lot of research for you to get those, you know, points and talk about those things in the book?
Absolutely. I spent probably, I would say, as much time writing as researching.
Mm-hmm.
I will just say it's 50-50.
Mm-hmm.
Because even though, that's I spent my summers there, and, we did those road trips, and, that's where my family's from. There's so much history there that, I couldn't even imagine. So, yeah, I did a lot of research.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely about the oil industry, because that was where they all got their money. And so, I had to create this oil company where, Matthias and Matthias Grimes created this oil company. And so I had to know, all about oil and,
Right.
and the drilling process. And I mean, I just probably knew more than I should.
But I mean, that's good because it helps you be able to flesh out the story. And I guess you can pick which things you're going to include and which things, that aren't, necessarily going to move the story along, but you know it. You know what's going on with that.
Yeah.
So in this book, of course, we meet Bailey, and she is, she has this gift of sight. And as you already kind of said, there are a lot of women who in families, and I'm sure men and some men as well, but we're focusing on the women in this particular story who have this gift to be able to see things and how it can be a blessing and a curse.
Right.
And, we see Bailey deal with that throughout the story as she's meeting these different women coming in to get their gowns. And then, one particular family, which we're going to talk about them in just a moment. But just to think about that and how people, even a lot of times in our communities where, Christian communities, having these gifts and things like that could be looked down upon. So I love the fact that you did incorporate that she had this gift and that she had her own struggles with even being able to exercise it.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, because I'm a big Tabitha Brown follower, and I was watching her, try to explain her gift of, being a seer and an empath, and then all of a sudden, she was getting kind of a little pushback on that, and especially in the Christian fold. And so I thought, wow, it just never even had crossed my mind that someone would think this is I mean, I know it could be a curse for Bailey, but I just never thought it would cross into that realm where people thought that she was doing, witchcraft or the devil's work or something like that. But then, when I did think about it, it's like, well, and that's kind of a little spin that I added to the story, that her aunt is like, they're going to string you up, you do not want to mess with this, put yourself out there with this gift, because people aren't going to see it as a gift, Right. And so, that was one of those things that hadn't crossed my mind. No, there wasn't any research necessary for that, because it was right.
We just know. We just know from experience. Anything that is not, in that book, or taught in church, people are going to find fault with it, even though we know historically as a people, there have been many different types of traditions and gifts and things like that we even incorporate in, in our Christian faith. So it just all depends on who you're talking to.
But it is a gift. I do believe it is a gift. And, I think most people ignore their gift. I mean, like, intuition and gut and all of that it is, we all have a piece of it. We all have a gift of intuition. And, a lot of us just ignore. It's faster and easier to ignore it and, just go with what you want to happen versus what this isn't right.
Right. Right. But one thing that's interesting about Bailey's gift, and it's funny, she even said, it's on the back of the book, it says something to the effect of, why do my visions have to be with naked bodies? So her visions are catching people doing things that maybe they shouldn't be doing in the eyes of other folks.
I know that was like, that chapter was like the third or fourth chapter, and my agent, when he read it, he's like, that should be the first chapter. I was like, oh, okay. It's like
Mhm.
kind of moved it up, just to get you get a quick insight as to what she has to see. You know,
Right.
it's not just just her imagination filling in the blank. She's like got full visuals of these affairs and what people are doing behind closed doors. So
Hmm.
yeah,
Well, yeah, that in and of itself, y'all, it was good to read that. But her, who comes into the story and is Elsa Grimes. We meet Elsa, who is this young lady who comes in and she's preparing to get married. And, she's figuring some things out about the person she's going to marry and just her life in
yeah,
general. So the introduction of Elsa is a person that makes Bailey start to rethink whether or not she's going to use this gift because of what she does see.
yes. Elsa is the character that I decided was going to have this trauma, a crime that was committed against her. And it was hard writing that because in this new writing climate, there are a lot of things that we can't talk about
Mm.
anymore. It's not like I want to, but I mean, it was part of the story. And
Mhm.
and like I said, I was bringing stories over that I actually experienced, and so or that I heard about, and
Right.
so I just was trying to figure out the most delicate way of telling about this attack and this unfortunate situation. And I wanted Elsa to be brave, but not, I wanted her to be brave, but not wash it away, like this didn't really happen to me. I wanted her to be brave, but not ignore, what happened to her. And,
Right.
and so I knew Bailey was the one to get it out of her,
Mhm.
and to be her ship, her guiding light. And so and I wanted that relationship to be kind of powerful, because we sometimes we just need someone to show us, or let us know it's going to be okay.
Right.
You're safe. And so yeah, I really struggled with how to tell the story without being graphic and
Mm-hmm.
all the things that are supposedly getting our books banned. you know
Wow.
when we know there are other things at play, but there's just a lot. There they can do it for any reason, and so I really was just trying to carefully tread that area.
Mm-hmm. That's something to think that when you're writing, you have to consider: is this going to get my book banned? Versus necessarily telling the story in the ways that you want to tell it. That's interesting that you
It
would have
is.
to
You
consider that.
have you have to think about that now. It's like in the good old days, I could just write whatever I wanted, as you saw
Mm-hmm.
in Stapley series. But now you do, and I thought, well, I got nominated for the book Center for the Book for in Oklahoma, and that was just, you know, it felt good
Oh
because
yeah.
really Oklahoma is kind of leading the charge
Right.
on the
Right.
bans and things like that, and so it felt really good to have that validation that the story was well told, and you know it was the truth. You get to tell the truth, but you tell
Mm.
it with a gentle hand. And so
Absolutely. I like that. Tell the truth, but with a gentle hand.
yeah,
And in this story, as I was reading and just really letting the story resonate with me, you do talk about a lot of things because, of course, there's the historical aspect. There's the woman's empowerment aspect. We're looking at tough situations that happen There is the whole spiritual aspect, or some people call it the woo-woo aspect of it all. So those are a lot of kind of plot devices, I guess, to incorporate within the story. So did you find it, a little bit of mystery too. So
Yes.
did you find it challenging just incorporating all those different pieces into telling the story?
No, I have always included some kind of suspense or mystery, even in Napoli Ever After. I know that little segment didn't make it into the movie, but
Okay.
there was a mysterious aspect going on. She was receiving these notes, and I mean, that goes back. But every story that I've ever written has a mystery element to it, and I didn't even realize it. So I think someone brought. How readers are really
Right.
your mirror. So someone brought it up to me, and I was like, you're right. And so I think that just came natural, just that there was going to be someone that DIED, it's like you can't
Unalived. As they say now, unalived. Yes.
you can't say so many things, but
Mhm.
yeah, so that was probably one of the things that I don't do often, but
Okay.
I did, do that. But otherwise, I've always had some kind of mystery, and it really does come kind of natural to me. So,
Mhm.
I was asked, are you going to write any romance? And I'm like, my romance just gets blurred by the suspense, I think. But
Okay.
but there's always romance. So I always have romance. There's always mystery. There's always, you know, some kind of validation and empowerment. And so
Right.
it's like just to put that together, like just like making a dress, you put all the pieces together and it's just a
Mhm.
beautiful, garment. So that's how I tell the stories. You just add a little bit of everything that needs to go, and I just end up with a little bit of mystery.
But you know what? As you were saying that, I was thinking about our lives. Really, our lives kind of incorporate a little bit all of it. There's love and sex and romance and, hopefully not murder, but, there are mysterious things going on where you're really
Yes.
trying to figure out what's going on because people aren't really being honest with you about things that are going on. And so, yeah.
Mhm.
So our lives are like that. So you're just, these stories are things that resonate with the lives that we live. And that kind of speaks to the fact that it is called The Secret Keeper. So there are a lot of secrets
Yes.
going on in this story, starting with looking at Elsa and the things that she's challenged with because of this thing that happened to her and not really wanting to be not able to be honest about what it is at first. There are things about love because that's one of the gifts that Bailey has. She can tell, like, is this the right person? Is this the person you should be marrying, or should
Right.
you be with someone else? So there's that aspect as well of trying to figure out, okay, yeah, she's getting married to this person, but it really is something that's more like a marriage of convenience or an arranged type situation, which happened for a lot of people. And in this book, it would have made sense because of who the families were.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the things that I also brought into the story was, like I said, talking to these brides, and I was not married. As just, kind of listening to everything that I was given. And the thing that I came away from it was that, the brides would always be getting married for their families, and
Mm.
the men were getting married out of choice. It was like a rare situation where a man was getting married because he had to, or someone was, kind of pushing him, or it was best for the family.
Mm.
Women is like nine times out of 10, there was an element of, this wedding, this marriage is for the betterment of my family.
Hmm.
And that was, this isn't the 50s.
Right, right.
So this was happening still, and I always thought that's just awful.
Yeah.
But but it was, that was the answer. That, I know things have changed probably a little bit, but it does, I think, play into the decision making for a bride,
Right.
when she's choosing her fiance, or choosing just even to be in a relationship. Oftentimes it is for the betterment of the family. And
Mhm.
and you can list that under betterment, financial security,
Right.
or just not marrying the person that the family doesn't want you to marry,
Mhm.
because of, it could be, race, it could be, um, just, it could be a million little things.
It can be a lot
So
of things.
yeah, so that was one of the things I came away from, and really feeling a little bit sad about. And so that became
Mm.
really the undercurrent of the entire story, of not being able to love the person that you want to love.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah, that definitely is the undercurrent that we see, and in many different ways as well. And thinking this is the 1950s, some of those things carried over even beyond that. But in the 1950s, it really would have been a thing of, without giving away too much of the story, whether it is, interracial or potentially same sex, or being pregnant and like, oh, you got
yeah.
to go get married because you're pregnant,
Hmm.
and then of course the economic things as well. So it's a lot of things. If we look back, 1954 was what, it's about 60 some years ago.
Yes.
So it's
Not that
like,
long ago.
it wasn't that long ago. So just thinking that many of our mothers and grandmothers may have been faced with some of these same challenges
Yes.
of having to, not necessarily marrying for love, but marrying because it was the quote unquote right thing to do, or because women couldn't just necessarily go out and have their own jobs and make their own money.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so
I
yeah.
yeah. Oh, I can see that.
1954 feels like a blink ago in the current. You got that right. In the current climate, it feels like a blink ago.
Not much. It's almost like like we had taken all those steps forward and then just ended up back where we started.
Right.
And that really, I hate to say it again, but Oklahoma leading the charge on a lot of the things they're trying to retroact, you know, as far as our history, and completely trying to bring together, religion and state, and it's just a lot going on. So,
Mhm.
like I said, you just have to be careful, even, even when you're writing now. I think going forward, it's, for the next few years, it's just going to be, you know, a lot of politics behind the writing and the art, and things that you normally wouldn't give two thoughts about are now going to be, is that going to be okay?
Right.
You know?
And one thing, over the weekend here in Atlanta, I had a chance to go to the Black Romance Book Festival.
Mm,
Um, and there were a lot of independent indie, published people there. And I think, to your point, I think that's probably what we're probably going to see, a lot more people just going and publishing independently. So there are certain things that they can kind of, at least from the getting published perspective, they can kind of circumvent that. Now that
yeah.
doesn't mean they won't get banned later, but at least they can get their works out in the world.
they
So,
can they can at least like put it out there, and everything the cycle changes and everything changes, so you just never know what's next, because things have really cooled off from the Zane days, and
mhm.
the even after Zane was the 50 shades, I was gonna say 30 shades.
50 Shades. Right?
50 Shades, and that was even a little tame compared to, Zane. But, we have really cut back on that, really. And I didn't get the memo. I didn't know, that we, and so even the little bit of, interaction I put in my story, I was like, is it too much? Is it too much? I had no idea.
It's not.
My daughter told me, like, oh, that's nothing, Mom. These stories are just really, out there. There's like these romancy books are just like sex every other chapter. I'm like, it's like, I didn't know because I haven't been reading, these stories. And so, things just change. And so but like I said, I don't know what's coming, how that's going to keep going, or if it's, going to get banned or flagged, or if the publisher is going to be sanctioned. We don't know. We just don't know. So I guess if anyone that is a writer out there, I would say write what you're comfortable with.
Right. Exactly. I mean, that definitely makes a difference. Write what you're comfortable with. But some yours is tame compared to some. There's some where like page 1, I'm like, whoa, I want to page 1, but I mean, and I guess my thing with steam and spice is, does it move the story along, or is it relevant to the story, or are you just doing it because you can? So for me as a reader, that makes a difference, So even if it is on the first page, we're like, okay, why is this happening on the first page?
Right.
But when you understand why it's happening, it makes a difference. So
right, like in our old Elin Harris days, he's like, you open the book, you're going to get on the first couple of pages.
Right, you already know.
You already know. But
you're right, Margaret. Everybody's got a different Richter scale. Exactly. Some people
that's true.
Clutch the pearls, and I'm just like, okay, I don't need to clutch them, but they're over here, and just in case I got them, just in case I'm gonna need to clutch them. But yes. Now in this story, it's coming of age as well. As I said, there are a whole bunch of things that are happening with these characters. I'm thinking specifically of Elsa because she is like really young and trying to decide, what she's going to do and how she wants to live, how she wants to love. But we have not yet talked about the person that, as I was looking at some of the reviews, that people really don't like in this book.
Ingrid,
her mother. So, I mean, just because for those of you who all watch regularly, we're not going to give you spoilers if you haven't read it. But, Elsa is getting married, but a lot of her getting married has to do with what her mother, Ingrid, expects of her. And Ingrid is kind of running the show, or at least attempting to run the show in a lot of ways.
Yes.
She is a piece of work.
I love Ingrid. I know.
Nice, though.
I'm from the school of you must have a good villain.
Yes.
You just do. I mean, that also, I think, impedes my ability to write a romance because where's the villain? So I do believe there has to be some kind of friction in the story, and Ingrid was definitely, the queen of friction. And in this story, she, was poor. She landed, Matthias Grimes as her husband, and she has this amazing, perfect, privileged life. And then she gets this daughter who is absolutely nothing like what she prayed for. I'm going to just go ahead and say that because she was a beauty queen. She was the lady of ladies, and so here comes her little girl who just wants to climb trees and ends up being gay. And in that time in 1950, like what bigger curse could there be for her, to have a daughter that didn't want to get married, didn't want to be a debutante, didn't want to be in the beauty circuit. And so she just really saw that pregnancy as an opportunity to at least get her married off.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, that was it was hard to write, and yet like
Yeah.
kind of fun in the side of me that wants to see the story get told
Yeah.
realistically.
Margaret said, it sounds like there's an Ingrid point of view villain retelling in the mix. Like, I don't know. Yeah, because
Like, I don't want to see her now.
yeah, no. Well, but I mean, and this is not saying too much. The way the story ends, I mean, it would be open to figure out what happens to her, or, what could potentially happen to her later on down the line. So,
Yeah.
but not that you want to tell that story, but
Yeah.
I mean, it could potentially be another story. But, the thing about her, even though she wasn't likable and she did a lot of things along the way to her family, to her daughter, and others that you have to read it to find out.
Yeah.
It's like, I didn't like her, but at the same time, it goes back to that old adage that hurting people hurt people. And so there were things within her that made her kind of become that way. And coming from a background that maybe she didn't have a whole lot. And she said, now that I have these things, I want to do all that I can to hold on to what it is that I've got, because I don't ever want to be that person again.
Yeah.
So it's like you don't like her, but you kind of understand her.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I learned really early in my writing journey, is that as the writer, you have to love all of your characters. You have to treat all of your characters with respect, or your reader is going to find them, unreadable.
Yeah.
So you really do have to love all of your characters, and give them their backstory, give them their therapy, and give them their hugs, their flowers, but everybody has to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
And so if not, don't put them in the story. If you don't want to hear from them, don't put them in the story. And so I am just a firm believer that every character is due their respect and their voice.
I love that you say that, don't put them in the story if you don't want to tell their story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I mean, otherwise they're just window dressing.
Yeah.
So, what's the point? What's the point?
Mm-hmm.
And this shows us the tension in all of that, between a mother and daughter, and how many mothers and daughters may have tension for a variety of reasons. A mother oftentimes has her view of what she thinks her daughter should be, and how does she respond when that daughter is not who she thought who she should be? How does that daughter decide I'm going to be who I want to be, regardless of who you want me to be?
That's that portion of what I'm saying. Listening to the brides, and then I get to meet the mother. I always get to meet the mother, always, and so I always got that sense of, oh, this is where this is all coming from. Mm-hmm. Always. And so that's our hero. Our moms are our heroes. So and that's that part of what I'm saying is, a bride is getting married for her family, and so the mom is the number one client on that list of making her happy, bringing her who she thinks will make her happy. And so that portion of the story is where Elsa was considering going through with this wedding. I mean, she was there, she was going to do it. And had she not met, I think, Bailey,
right,
and got the strength and, found a voice, she would, there would have been no question. Oh, the story ends at page 150 because she's married.
Gets married and doesn't live happily ever.
Right. Yes.
Right. Yes. Living a life that isn't the life that she would choose for herself.
Yeah.
So, and we also get to see in this book, we get to see love and how it can come up unexpectedly, how it can return unexpectedly,
Mm-hmm.
how it may not, what you thought it was going to be, it ends up being something different. So all of those things play out, with our characters and how they land. Now, one person we did not talk about was Aunt Charlene. Now, I loved Aunt Charlene.
You do too.
Yes, yes, and she is Bailey's aunt, who basically ends up raising her at after a certain point in her life. But I loved her story as well because she is a woman who kind of did what she felt was going to be best for her family and herself.
Yeah, Charlene, Aunt Charlene. Oh, I loved writing her character. And one of the things that I had in my life was a lot of aunts. And so, she was going to definitely carry the story in her own way with her own backstory. But I also wanted everyone to feel like she was their aunt too.
Yes.
Like just that person that you could go to and, you're going to get the real. You're going to get everything real on, no mince words. She's there. And so, I created her to be all of our aunties, just that person that when you close the book, she's the one you're going to miss.
Yes.
The most.
Yes. Yeah, I really enjoyed her because, for a multitude of reasons, just being that aunt who, has had to make some tough choices in her own life, but she steps in when she's needed. And, she supports Bailey when she's a young girl and, she needs someone to take care of her. She makes that adjustment to go and take care of her. But she also was her own woman in terms of work and things like that.
Yeah.
Because at this time, mind you, the 1950s, most Black women were working as domestics and things like that in that time frame. But she was like, I'm gonna be an entrepreneur. I'm gonna have my own business, make my own money, do my own thing. I'm not going over there and doing that. Even when there could be some extra, there was a time in the book where she's like, "No, I don't need it. I'm not going over there. You're not putting me in that spot. No, not today, player."
Not going back.
I love that about her.
Yeah. Oh, I see. I love those type of characters. Yes, so do I. So do I. I did get, one of these comments from someone, they always tell the authors, like, don't read the reviews. Like, okay. And I'm just like, but someone was like, this is, Peyton Place. This story is Peyton Place mixed with something else. And I was just like, well, thank you, because Peyton Place was one of those books I shouldn't have been reading, but I loved, I just, that long time ago, reading it always stuck with me. And so that is exactly the kind of feel, that I was probably going for and didn't realize it because I didn't even remember that I loved Peyton Place, and so just really when you hit the mark, you're just kind of like, thank you, I did it. I did what I set out to do. So
yes, I just looking at the world that you built in this small Oklahoma town, because of course when you have these small towns, everybody's going to know everybody. I think at the beginning you said it was like less than 17,000 people living in this, in this area. So even though that sounds like a lot of people,
yeah,
when you're looking at, this core of these white wealthy people, they were all going to be traveling in the same circles. Miss Jackson, who owns the store where Bailey works, she has started this store at the request of or the behest of these wealthy women who are going to all of these wonderful galas and balls and weddings and doing all of these things, and they want somebody who's going to provide their clothing. So yes, it's a bigger town, but this is like a microcosm of that town, and yeah, everybody's gonna know everybody in that small environment, and they're going to intermarry and all that kind of stuff. So yeah. It makes sense. Makes a all the sense in the world. So there was one other question. I want to make sure I did not forget it. When you talk about the book with different audiences, like if you're out traveling, do different people kind of pick up different things from the book, or is it pretty universal depending on who you're talking, the groups that you've talked to about it?
It's been so far really universal. I mean, it was presented in a way where, like I said, I was doing things delicately, and I just, had to make sure I didn't lose people that were like, well, there's nothing happening, but it's a slow burn. And so, a lot of the book clubs have been like, it was a slow burn, but man, when it hits, it really hits. And so I was just like, yes, well, good. That's also, check. So yeah, it's been pretty universal. I would say this is a little bit of a slower rollout for books than I'm used to, just because I feel like there's just, so many ways to release a book now that finding your audience is just like not as easy. Like, I came from the era of Black expressions.
Yes, I remember them.
Yes, girl, like you put out a book, boom, it went straight to your audience that knew who you were and what you were putting out. And so there was no like, well, what's this about? It's like it was automatic, and so that was a little bit different, just coming out to this, historical fiction, searching for my people, as they say. So, but I think I'm finding them, and I do want to keep writing historical fiction. I'm probably going to slip some contemporary in there, and book number 10 of Napoli Ever After. But yeah, I think I'm finding my people.
I love that. And it's interesting that you would say that because you would think that, nowadays, like Book Talk and all these things like that, what I'm doing here, as I mentioned, that festival I went to, it was so many authors there. It was a whole bunch of influencers and things like that. And you would think that it would help, but you still got to find your people. You still have to find your audience. You have to find those people who are going to be champions of your work. So that does make sense, because maybe at a time, to your point, Black expressions, it might have been 20 books a year. It wasn't a lot, but now when you could potentially give 20 books a week, 20 books a month. And there are all these different genres and subgenres, so folks do really have to figure out what they want. So yeah. And Rosie Lee, who actually is an author herself, she says, I love that you're able to go back and forth between genres. That's a gift. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Rosie. I do enjoy historical fiction, and early on when we first started talking, you said it's a skill set. And I do believe historical fiction is a little harder to write because, there's so many details that have to be researched. And even when I wrote What Passes as Love, I mean, I was in there in the archives, just like, how do you do this? How did you even take a bath? I mean, come on. These are the things I want to know. And, there was just like detail by detail by detail, things that I had to know. And, with contemporary, it's just like you jump right in. You don't have to describe what anybody's wearing. You don't have to describe, how they're communicating, or you don't have to describe a lot. And I really do like painting a picture, a setting, And so even when I do write contemporary fiction, the room is, everything. Everything is set up. You know what room you're in, what the house looks like, everything. I'm just one of those people, like a hands-on. I like to see it from my, when I hear it, when I read it, I want to see it. And so, in historical fiction, you just absolutely have to do that.
Right.
There's no question.
There was a comment. The bathroom issue is the words like "be real but don't get graphic." All of that. Margaret also says, with just the number of books out, it's the paradox of choice. We do have a lot of choices. It's work to choose, work on both ends for the reader and the writer.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I'm glad you're finding your audience. Oh, yes. Yes.
Thank
And it
you.
definitely makes a difference when you switch genres because people have gotten used to, as I mentioned at the top, or you've said, hey, there's 9 Napoli books and one that still hasn't come out yet. So if
Yeah.
people get used to writing a certain type of thing, then you do have to start over. I
Mm-hmm.
heard a writer say recently that it doesn't matter about your previous success. Every time you put something out, in some ways you have to prove yourself over and over again. So
Yeah, well, we do. Absolutely. When I say we, we
agree.
absolutely have to start over with every single story. And series just don't carry the day anymore like they did, like where you could just say, well, it's the same character, and that doesn't mean as much as it used to. It's still the story. It's still, the what do you call it? FOMO, fear of missing out. You want all the readers out there to feel like, well, if I don't read this, I'm not, I'm missing out. You got to get that snowball rolling down the hill really fast, and so it's just a lot going on. It's not just the story. And because like I said, I write everything in there: the mystery, love, romance. My characters are just family by the time you finish reading the story, but there's still so much attached to that marketing. It's just another animal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's why we have JOMO, the joy of missing out and continue. Yes, sometimes you want to miss out. Sometimes, like, y'all could have left that one, but sorry, not sorry.
I have to get a quote book for that one, The Joy of Missing Out.
Right. But it is a thought though, because think about it, how well, a lot of times they're more so talking about reboots, but how sometimes people will be like, this story has already been told. We don't need any more of this story. Oftentimes they do that in reboots. But then you get something like Forever that just came out, which I haven't watched yet, which was based on a Judy Blume book, but they took it and turned it around. So even though it's based on something that she wrote, it's a totally different story because now it's Black characters and it's contemporary and all those things.
Yeah,
So I
it
guess
becomes
it's
something else.
yeah, it becomes something else, depending on the source material. Use that source material, but take it and do other things with it. But I do have to bring that up because you do have a film, one that we've seen thus far. So for you as the writer, of course, everything that's in the book didn't make it to the movie. We've already talked about that. But, number one, congratulations, because every person doesn't get to have their work turned into an adaptation. But how was that process for you, just in having something that you wrote and that is your baby that's precious to you, now kind of turning it over to someone else and having them tell the story in their way?
Oh, that was the biggest wonderful trophy. I just that's the way I see it, like an achievement, because really every writer wants to see their work on film, and then you can't tell me they don't. So and that was just one of those things where I'm just like, through the whole process, like, it's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen. Oh, please let it happen. Please let it happen.
Mm-hmm.
But you just have to like keep yourself grounded. Like, if it doesn't happen, I'll be okay. But please let it happen. Please let it happen.
Yes.
And when it finally did, I just was like it just you let it out, because tears and everything from wanting it so badly, and it happened, and it was just beautifully done. I mean, I couldn't have asked for anything more. It was beautifully done. And I would get these comments like, oh, they didn't do this or do that, or the story was different. It's like every book that turns into a film is different.
Mm-hmm.
Mine was minimally different compared to a lot of the stories, and the characters were so true to the novel, and so I couldn't have been happier.
Yes, and hopefully you all have watched it. She's got the poster behind it, Napoli Ever After,
Yes.
on Netflix. I think it's still on Netflix, but yeah, it's a beautiful story,
It
and
is.
you know, for a lot of us sisters who might struggle with those sorts of things of how we show up in the world and
Mhm.
finding love and all of those things, it was an excellently done movie, and on the heels of your excellent stories.
Thank
So,
you.
of course, we mentioned at the top of the hour that The Secret Keeper of Main Street is coming out in paperback tomorrow. So that's an accomplishment as well to go from hardback to
Yes.
paperback. So, yay, congratulations on that.
Thank you. And I've been going through all these things with my parents that it kind of like got away from me. And
Mhm.
so I was like, yay, we're going to have our interview. We're going to talk to, Marcy. And I was like, it's the paperback coming out. So it just lifted my spirit. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. Now, I do have to ask you, I know that the paperback of The Secret Keeper of Main Street is coming out, but are there any other things that we can be on the lookout for from you, in the next year or so? Because
Um,
you're always writing.
I
So,
am. I just turned in some things, so I'm just waiting to, hear back. And, I've been working on the Diane Carroll story for the last
ooh,
4 years, maybe.
ooh.
And so, it's still not ready, but that is what, has kept me happy.
I love
you
that.
just love because I love Diane Carroll, and I just, I cannot wait for her story to come out.
I
So
love
yeah,
that.
yeah. But other than that, I do have, a couple other things in the works. So you know, and trying to, I really am trying to put my hat into some romance. So
Hmm.
we'll see how that goes.
You sound like a friend of mine. It's like, okay, because romance, the tropes and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, the story
And
just is told differently when
well,
it's a
everyone thinks it would be natural for me because Napoli Ever After was kind of a romance, but her love, her arc of love was for herself, that just acknowledging who she was and what she deserved, and that's just a little different from romance. It just really is. So
Mhm.
but everyone thinks I'm just like, oh, you're not one of those out, like, but that's just not my forte. So I'm you heard it from me first. I'm trying.
Right. I'm sure you will succeed because, as Rosie Lee said earlier, you move between the genres and you just do what you have to do. But that does bring, and I'm sorry, a lot of times I say I'm done and I'm really not. So but when it's time to write different types of stories, beyond whatever research that you have to do, like say in the case of a historical fiction, are there things that you do as a writer to maybe shore up your skill set to make it easier to write if you're doing something different from what you have done in the past?
I'm just an avid reader. I read, I read, I read, and that is my, my lesson.
Mhm.
I review books for for a journal, and so I read even when I don't have to read. I'm
Mhm.
just I'm just always reading, and so that's my really the best lesson anyone that's pursuing writing can do for themselves is to always be reading.
Always be reading.
And you do need to stretch around and read other things besides what that genre that you want to write in.
Mhm.
It's just it's an the what you gain from reading is beyond any MFA program or there. It's just it's an art in it of it in and of itself.
I
So that
love that.
yeah, reading is number one.
And that makes a lot of sense. Read in other genres as well, because sometimes it may not be that you're trying to copy their style in as much as you can maybe learn how their use of their turn of a phrase or the use
Oh
of language,
yeah.
just different things like that that can like spark a thought in your brain.
and spark joy. I mean, the minute you feel that joy, you're like, wait a minute, what was that? What was that? Because that's all I'm here for, is to spark joy. So if I get it, I'm gonna give it,
I love that. I love that. Well, Trisha, we could probably talk for another 30 minutes, but I'm not going to hold you in that way. But thank you, everyone that's here, for being a part of the conversation. If you haven't had a chance to read The Secret Keeper of Main Street yet, please go and grab it tomorrow. As we already said, it'll be out in paperback.
Yay.
Check your libraries, all the places where you get books. It is on audio as well.
Yes,
So
Libby.
yes.
Yeah.
So you have those options, because actually I read like 53%, and then I listened to the rest. A lot of times I do that just because life is lifing, and I want to make sure that
it's a different experience. I mean, when I listen to a story, and then I've done both. I've read a whole book and then went back and listened to it, and I hear completely a different story.
Mm-hmm.
It really is different. So
it is different.
Yeah.
And well, one of the authors that I saw over the weekend, she was saying that she writes and then she like reads what she wrote out loud. And I'm like, oh wow, she reads it herself out loud to kind of work through the language and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a whole lot of things, and auditory versus reading it are definitely different.
Yeah.
So a couple last comments. Listening to a big chorus of voices helps you fine tune the sound of your own individual song. Yep. That's good.
Yes. That's lovely. Thank you, Margaret.
And a wonderful discussion. I'm looking forward to the Diane Carroll story. Yeah, that is huge. That is huge. Yeah. I'm looking forward to that as well. So, all right, ladies, thank you so much for being here. And for those who watch this in the replay, please go ahead and, make sure you like it and, share this out with others and let people know about the story if you haven't had a chance to read it as of yet. And then just be on the lookout for other great things coming from Trisha. Of course, you can see at the bottom, all the places you can follow her and all of that. So Trisha, thank you for being here. I'm going to let you grab some water and don't hang up yet, because I just want to say goodnight to everybody else. But thank you again, cousin. We'll figure out how we're cousins, but thank you again for being here. And I'll see you just in a moment. All righty. So thank you again, everyone, for being here. I enjoyed having that conversation with Trisha. I have been a fan of her work for a long, long time. So I'm glad that we finally had a chance to sit down and have this conversation about The Secret Keeper of Main Street. And I know that there are so many other great things that she has on the horizon. So I look forward to seeing you again next week, talking about romance and going into the romance field next week. We'll be talking to Maya Ariel about her new book, No Ordinary Love. So that's next week. And so get ready for that. And until then, keep on reading, and we'll see you again real soon. Take good care. Bye-bye.